Hey, friends, I'm Jill Griffin, the host of the Career Refresh podcast. And today I'm reintroducing you to my friend, Rebecca Gebhardt. She is a leadership expert, a four times founder, a two-time author, and she partners with visionary organizations through her consulting company, Rise Up Consulting, where she empowers leaders, helps them focus on goal setting, performance management, and developing leadership pipelines. Today, our discussion explores the challenges of promoting top sales performers into leadership roles and the critical importance of leadership training. Rebecca shares insights from her latest book, Leaderboard to Leadership, offering strategies that impact recruiting, retention, and revenue while avoiding burnout. You can find her book on Amazon. I will also put all the information below in the show notes. Rebecca's mission is to reshape leadership for the future. So get your notes app. You are definitely going to want to take notes. All right, let's jump in. Rebecca, welcome back. I love that you're joining me today to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Congratulations on the new book. This is really exciting. Tell us how it's been.
It's been a whirlwind. There's so much emotional energy that goes into writing a book, and then it's just in process for so long, and then it happens, and you're like, oh my gosh, is it out there? So it's out there. We had a launch party. It's been awesome. It's been really fun getting text messages from people like you, emails like, I bought the book, I'm getting the book, a picture with them with the book. It's been very fulfilling. It's been very fulfilling. I feel really good. That was a goal of mine to get some of my work out in the world. And it's out.
And a two-time author, which is also super impressive. So as you and I were talking, I've read the book and I've gone through and I have questions to ask that I know our listeners will benefit from. So my first question as we dig in is most sales leaders are promoted from the sales team. That is one of the points that you make in the book, which as someone who's come from marketing and strategy, I've always been sales adjacent. And yes, I sell, but not as a pure seller the way you're talking about. And what I found fascinating is you said that according to your research, 70% of sales readers say that they were in the top 25% of sales leaderboard. So some people listening may think, well, that's a beautiful thing. You have this super seller now leading the team. Tell our listeners why this is a problem.
Oh, it's a problem because when you aren't given training, what happens for the most part, where you just said they are producing sales leaders. So it's not like some other jobs where you go from an IC to a leader and you are actually being a manager, right? You're being a leader. When you're in sales, what oftentimes happens is, hey, you're doing really well. Why don't you keep selling? And can you also manage these three people, right? Or can you also
thing to do?
Just on top of your normal stuff. Yeah. And it sounds really good from an organization's perspective because you don't have to pay. They might give them a raise a little bit or a bump, but you don't have to pay another person because you have this individual who knows how to sell. And you assume that because they know it, they can teach it. And knowing something, telling someone how you did something is very different than teaching someone how to do it. There's issues with the mindset shift that happens. And I was this way. I was a producing sales leader. You put your sales hat on, you take it off, you put your, like flip your hat around. Right now I'm a leader and now I'm a salesperson. And it's confusing for so many people and a lot of nuances. And I don't believe that top salespeople make bad leaders, but the assumption that they're going to be great without any training, the data doesn't say it. And so what we end up doing is unintentionally is we set up these phenomenally successful salespeople up to fail because we don't support them. We don't have the conversation. Here's what's going to be different. Here's how you have to think different. Here's how your skills need to adapt. And here's the new behaviors you're now responsible. Here's the results you're responsible for. So Yeah, but most of them are in the top of the sales leaderboard.
It's reminding me of a conversation I've had a lot lately about leaders who want to get on boards of directors of either nonprofits or publicly traded companies, and understanding that they're stepping into that role because of their excellence and their expertise and their skill set. But the job is different now. They're not doing the head of audit. You're not doing the, people talent management role anymore. You are mentoring the people that are doing those roles. So when someone's in that position, let's say they're stepping into leadership now for the first time, give them a couple of tips as what they should consider doing if they're the person in it, because their management may not be helping them with this.
Correct. Yeah, this is a problem that this is the status quo problem. So if people are listening and going, "Oh no, I never got training and it's been 15 years." It's okay. Just do something about it, right? In the book, I actually have a new role, new rules chapter
I
on
wrote that
a
down. I
90-day
loved
plan.
it.
Yeah, like a 90-day plan. But to answer your questions, I'm pulling from that is number one, the expectation conversation with what is expected now in this role. You do it with yourself. You would ask your boss what those expectations are, which seems like a no-brainer, but honestly, it's just you're good, you'll be fine. People confuse encouragement with training as well, right? There's a lot of that in the sales world. We're going to encourage you, think positive, you're motivated. Well, that's not training and development. So, but anyway, so expectations with your boss, and then expectations with your team. I think those, you know this too, it's expectations that then you can have accountability, then you can build trust, you understand what the relationship's built on. And so I kind of give a blueprint for how that conversation should go, but that I think is number one. And then the second theme that almost gets a little annoying, at least it did for me in the book as I was editing it for I come back to these three areas that are all over in onboarding, when you're coaching, when you're looking at recruiting people, is to look through the mindset, behaviors, and skill sets.
Mm.
It's those three. I was told years ago by a mentor that if I didn't like where I was in anything in life, my health, relationships, work, sales, I should look to my habits, skill sets, and mindset to find the culprit, to be able to say, "Ooh, okay, well, I need to do more of these behaviors." Looking at those and saying, what should I be doing now? Okay, you used to be closing deals. Are you maybe you still are supposed to be closing deals, or are you supposed to be coaching others to close deals?
Yeah.
So
And I just want to go
yeah,
deeper on that for a second. So for our listeners, yes, there are always extreme circumstances like marketplace conditions or private health concerns for yourself or your or family members. We're not talking about those here, about what's in your control. We're talking about everyday run of the mill. I have a job. I need to be looking at my habits, my skills, and my mindset if I'm not creating the result that I want, or if I'm not where I want to be or the team needs to be, which I think is kind of a really helpful way, because it means that I get to look to myself and I can change some of it. I can't change the external circumstances, but I get to change my approach and think about it differently. How have you personally applied that philosophy?
Oh, in many, many ways. So, a recent example, well, not recent, it's been like 4 years now, but when COVID happened, I remember it was garbage day, and we have everyone lines up their garbages, and it was recycling day as well. Every other week's recycling. And I was walking the dog down the street and I noticed, hope my neighbors don't listen to this. I noticed there were a lot of liquor bottles in the garbage cans, like several. One neighbor was like, they got an order of alcohol from it was just like, you saw
Like from a distributor bringing it to a private residence.
yes. Yeah, a local brewery, they made sure that they got, like, these were the priorities. And I saw a stat, it was like alcohol sales were projected to be 50% up because people were coping, not in the best way. And I went, oh my gosh, we're going to wake up from this in 2 years. We're going to be overweight. We're going to have all these terrible habits, and I need to do something. I am opposite of many people. When things get hard, I root down and I'm like, I'm just stronger. Like that's when things turn on. And I think maybe that's for a lot. Necessity
Yep.
brings a lot of innovation, but I got clear on my health. And so I started tracking my food. I stopped going to the gym. I lost 10 pounds. Was working out at home. So I looked at that with my health. For my business, sometimes, and you and I, we give out, we can see other people's deals very easily. We can't see our own. And so I was looking at my pipeline or lack thereof with business, like business was going well. I'm like, I need more pipeline. I wasn't doing the networking behaviors. I was working on client work and I went, this isn't going to be healthy. Business is great right now, right? But it's like I would say that the size of your bank account is not the litmus test for your success. It's the size of your pipeline. And that could be in any business, in sales, or it's like, that's great, but what do you got coming on that's going to keep you successful? So I think those two situations for sure. There's been more recently a shift in my mindset. I've gotten into a little bit of Wayne Dyer. I had not read him in a while, and I've been going back and just choosing. You and I were alluding to this a little bit before we started recording, but choosing to see what's in front of me instead of complaining what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to share a personal story, but I won't. I don't want to offend anyone in my family. But you know what I mean? Like instead of being like, they're not here or I can't believe that person got that. It's like, okay, what's helping? And that has been, Jill, I will just say I've had like in the last 2 weeks had like this explosion of opportunities and just excitement. And because I've been focusing on what's possible instead of complaining about what isn't. And so
Yeah. And I think again, for our longtime listeners, they know sometimes you have to process what's not possible. Sometimes you have to process the disappointment, the annoyance, the things that are out of your control. We're not saying don't do that. We're saying that don't stay there. That in order to get what you don't have, you have to do what you're not doing. So work it out with a therapist, a coach, whatever you need to do, a mentor, a friend, right? And then get back into, so what are you going to do about it? Because if you're here and you want to, like you said, increase your pipeline, I mean, I think this is the same thing even if you're looking for a job in our current marketplace. If you're looking for a job, you need to know your data. Well, how many outreaches are you making? I don't want to hear that you've applied to 50 jobs this month on LinkedIn. Like, I'm sorry that that's the way our industry is right now, but I want to know how many actual connections you've made. Because in order for you to get networking opportunities, just the way in order for you to have active sales conversations, you need to be doing some tracking of your own data that says, okay, so for every 50 calls I make a month, 5 of them turn into live conversations. Okay, so does that number work? Because then what converts? So again, I think it's the same thing whether you're talking about closing a sale or you're talking about networking or an opportunity or going for your next job opportunity. It's the same thing, looking at what you can control versus what you can't.
yeah, no, what you just said, I I know you probably say it all the time, but I think it bears repeating because it's such a basic concept, but people miss it. What you just said is how many meetings it takes 50 outreaches to get 5. Whatever someone's number is, let's say they're not as talented, they have to do 100 to get 5. Most people don't even know what those numbers are. And they don't realize like where they get their biggest bang for their buck. And I think when you're new at something, you just got to just work, right? You got to hustle, but then you have to take a step back and say, and this is important for leaders because you have to be able to project, you have to show people how it's possible to achieve your goals. And you only do that with not only, but a big part of that is knowing what
Where you're starting
behaviors.
from. You got to know your data.
Yeah.
You got to know your data.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So taking another turn, one of the things you said in your book, which, I have it on Kindle, so I've highlighted and I was like, it's And I want you to talk a little bit about this because this was, I don't know that I would say it was a new concept, but you said it in such a succinct way that I was like, oh my goodness. You wrote, we all know someone who has been leading for 20 years with 1 year experience repeated 19 times. This blew my mind, Rebecca. I've seen it. We've all felt it. We know it's happened. Tell us more about what you're seeing happening there.
Yeah, that followed a story of that I shared of a gentleman who had approached me after I did a not a retreat, but a leadership development for their key leaders. And he came up to me and he said, I didn't really think we needed your help.
Mm,
He was an old-fashioned hard work is how you succeed mentality. He goes, but after, hearing what you do, I really want to thank you. And it was on time and energy management was this 2-day event. And he goes, I wish I would have known this 40 years ago.
mm.
And so here is this man he has worn his heart on his sleeve, um, very successful, but has just been doing it the same. And some people get their best results doing it the same way, but you have to be a student of the game as you play the game. And you have to look up and realize, okay, it is no longer feasible to do it the same way. And in sales, what happens is people go, well, but I got a lot of money. Look at my title. I must be doing it right. I have had sales leaders tell me, well, when your team does more than my team, you can come tell me how to, I'm like, but I see, you know what I mean? It was just that repeat, I was like, oh, okay. So that's what I meant by that. And I've been doing more reflective things lately than I ever have. And I had one of my best friends who's super successful. She's an insurance broker. And she goes, I just learned that when I found referrals, my closing percentage went up and the deals were bigger. She goes, I learned that years ago. And I was like, I didn't know I was supposed, I just was like, you learned that years ago because we were in the same business together. I thought my job was just to be coachable and work really hard. It never even occurred to me to take stock of what my strengths are, which I know is like nails on a chalkboard to you. That's like your thing. And so
Right.
but so yes, having the mindset of continual learning to say, not take any extrinsic outside validation as proof you're doing it right. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, but just to stay curious. People get less curious the more experience we get. And then we go, I know how to do this. I know how to do it. Let
Right,
me
which
just
means
teach.
you're not learning and you're not coachable and
Yeah.
you're sort of
Yeah.
staying in that stagnant place. Yeah, I mean, just the way you phrase that, it's like you have 1 year experience and doing it 19 times, which means there's really no growth. And I'm guessing you stayed in the job because at least there's some success. But what would have been possible, perhaps, if you started to think about, as you've said, your mindset, your skills, and your habits in a different way? Yeah.
That's the thing, that the opportunity cost, it's like, hey, I did this, I found success. The question is, how much more was there for the taking if we had been curious and open to
Yes.
doing something? I'm not saying drastically different. You don't have to do it. Some people do, they find success there, but I'm just saying, like, what could have been there?
Mm, hmm. So when
Yeah.
you're going from an independent contributor and let's say you're getting tapped and you're up, you win, you're now the new sales leader. You've mentioned this throughout the book. You talked about playing to your strengths and not your weaknesses. And I talk about this all the time. Like, look, you need to mitigate your weaknesses. You need to figure out a way to delegate. You need to figure out a way to partner. This is work, not a hobby. We're not saying that you can be terrible at something and not have to, look at it. What we're saying is spending effort into the things that you're not so great at isn't going to give you the outcome as double down in the areas of your excellence, right? So, one of the stories that you shared in the book, which I love because I also love cribbage, For anyone listening and not familiar, it is a card game that's also like wooden pegs and you track your score. I don't know, Rebecca could explain. But you talk about how there was differences between how you would approach training or teaching your son how to play cribbage versus the way your husband would have. And neither is right or wrong. And I think that's what we're talking about when we're going from an independent contributor to being the leader. Therefore, our job is to create capacity for others to reach their goal. You have to train them in a different way. So go a little deeper into that story.
Yes. So, uh, we love cribbage around here. I was a late learner in cribbage. My family had played a long time. I just wasn't interested. And then I think I learned when I was 28 years old. But we both wanted to teach our son. Our daughter was not interested in playing cribbage. She wants to play other things. So I said, well, why don't we teach him the rules of the game first? So, like how you add to 15, if you find combinations to get to 15, you get points, you get, runs or point. I wanted to explain all the rules. And my husband goes, well, that's silly. Why don't we just deal it up and show him how to play the game? And then we'll learn as we go. And because that's how my husband gets his best results is by experimenting. Like, I don't know, let's try this. Let's put this
And
together.
adapting to whatever's in front of him.
Yeah, yes. And he finds great success there. I don't. And we were fighting and getting very annoyed with each other. And then I was like, oh, CJ, buddy, how do you want to learn this game? And it turns out CJ is more like me anyway. So he likes the rules, but, and this is what we do. We think our jobs as new sales leaders is to show someone how I did it. Here's how I did it, because that's all we know how to do. No one teaches you how to coach to someone else's strengths. And so, this is bad modeling around. LinkedIn is full of people. I made 7 figures. I'll share my blueprint. You can do it too.
I say it all the time, especially as a coach. Seriously, every day I get hit up either between one of my instant messengers or an email where someone's going to show me how to do X, Y, and Z. Unless you give me your brain, work in my business, and stick around for the whole time, I don't really want to hear what you have to say. Because it's your way of doing it,
correct,
not you understanding my magic, my gifts, and how I could create the same results.
Yeah.
And that's what you've been saying throughout the entire book, is that you're going from an independent contributor to a leader. And that means that you need to play to your team's strengths and how to deal with them differently. And I love that, because what that says for, again, anybody who's familiar with like Gallup's strengths. And again, I'm guessing because we haven't given one to your son and your husband assessment, but you're someone who sees in frameworks. You're someone who's very strategic. Let's think about the plan. Where are we going to go? If this happens, then this. If this happens, then that. Whereas your husband is probably someone who's much higher and adaptable. I'm going to sense and feel what's in front of me. I'm going to pivot when I need to, and I'm going to bring all my senses to the table, but I'm in the now, I'm being present. Whereas you're looking at something and saying, I want to have a little bit of a glide path. How are we getting there? There's nothing wrong with either approach.
Yeah. I have had clients that we have gone over as different strengths. And I'm like, your way of working through this right now, am not even computing. We need a framework, or I'm literally not following you. And it's not because I'm not intelligent. I'm just like, this is chaos. We need to organize the chaos. It's brilliant, but it's not. Yeah. So I say in the book, you want to treat everyone the same, but coach them differently. And sometimes it's an experiment. Not every organization has a budget. I mean, they should, but they don't have a budget to do a strengths finder or a Colby assessment or a DISC, whatever it is. They don't have it. And so, but you can tell them, hey, when you've gone back and you've been successful in the past, what's been there? And alliteration, I love to say, is when we define success, we're able to duplicate it. And so many people aren't able to define what makes them good. They go, I don't know. They're just not, there's nothing special about me. I just worked really hard. And it's like, no, there is something special about you. And that's a whole other thing, right?
That's a whole, that'll be our next meeting. We'll talk about it. But I think also what you're saying is important, because we're thinking about, you're defining, you're duplicating it. I would also say this comes into an unfortunate reality when we're doing job reviews. Because if I'm telling you what the end goal is, and I want you to hit it, that's option one. If I'm telling you and critiquing you and giving you feedback that you didn't do it my way, that's option two. Well, which one do you want? Right? Me telling you or giving you a lower rating or a lower review because you didn't do it my way. No, no, no. You need to define it and tell them the end goal and let someone bring their gifts to their table, their strengths to the table. Look, they may need coaching. The way they go about it may not be the way it works, but giving them a space to breathe into it.
There's so much, I didn't go into it in the book, but I am a big fan of Daniel Pink. And in his book, Drive, he talks about purpose, mastery, and autonomy. When we stifle people's creativity, we put a cap on their potential when we force them, when we take away their autonomy, when we take away their choices on how they just want to go about and do it, their autonomy on setting the goal, right? Or whatever. And no manager wants to be that person. People are literally doing, not everybody, but most leaders are doing the best they can with what they have. It comes from good intentions of being like, I want you to be as successful as me. I want you to be more successful than me. They just aren't given that training to see the differences of how that is. And I'll tell you, I'm 43. I didn't really learn this stuff until the last 5 or 6 years. I would kind of intuitively sort of help in that regard, but I didn't understand this depth of really how to bring out the best in other people by giving them space. And so a leader's job is to create the circumstances to win. That's their job.
Yes.
And part of that is giving autonomy, coaching to others' strengths. Yeah. Getting out of their way, kind of.
Yeah. So you mentioned that most organizations have systems to onboard salespeople. However, most don't have something that can help a new sales leader. Why are sales leaders not given a training or a system or taught how to lead? What's your thoughts there?
I have theories, but no succinct research because there's no research on this. It's such a status quo. It's like, how they haven't done any medical training or medical research really on women.
Don't get me started.
Sorry, I know it's
like 52% of the population. I can't see you. Do you exist?
Yeah, it's like, what? You know what I mean? Like, what? That's kind of what this is like with frontline leaders. And I feel like larger organizations they have their emerging leader program. They have some onboarding, but it's ignored because of the status quo. We think that previous success will translate to future success, and that's not true. Previous behavior and habits correlate to future behavior and habits, but that's not a guarantee.
Right.
And I think particularly in sales, I mean, this was a conversation I had with a very large organization this morning who want to do something about this, but they go, the problem that a lot of organizations, it wasn't them in particular, but they say, if we train someone, then they leave. There's and sales leadership turnover rates are 18, 19 months. And so if I'm an organization and I'm like, I don't know if I want to invest in them.
Or I'm training my competition.
Yeah. And I get that. That's just a very scarcity mentality to have towards it. And so my perspective on this, if you look at the data on the next generation show, the Gen Zs, if you look at what the future of leadership development as a whole, not even just sales leadership development, isn't even about training and prepping them. It's motivating and attracting because Gen Z don't want to be leaders. There are some that do, right? But most of them, they don't want the lifestyle. They see the examples that have been set by people who can't get their life together. All it is, it's just like who work too much. They don't want to be them. Mm-hmm. And so part of this is like attracting. Here's some different ways this could go. And here's the thing. If Gen Z expects, they view their employers as post-secondary degrees. That is from ATD, one of their monthly, I don't know what month it was, it maybe like the June or July their magazine that comes out, and it was just fascinating
Mm,
reading the research. But and I think I actually have it in the book. I think that made the book of what percentages those were, but they see it as post-secondary education. And so if you're not going to train them, you're going to lose them anyway.
sure.
And I had done, and I'm sure you do this too, like after we work with organizations, or then we give like the surveys and the assessments. And at one organization I worked with, 55% of the people who are still there 2 years later said they didn't know if they would be at that organization without leadership development, if they had not gone through the program. And these are, so it's the higher the level, the leader in an organization, the more value there is, right? It's like if you lose them, it's like higher stakes. My theory, my focus, where I'm choosing to break the status quo, is instead of enabling someone their whole career and then spending millions of dollars fixing bad habits and going, what did you learn? What did you not learn? Let's set them up when it's less expensive to train them, when
Mm,
they're moldable and coachable, and set up the right habits. And then your leadership pipeline, it becomes so much stronger. So to answer your question, I think it's crazy people don't train their new sales leaders, but I understand why they wouldn't.
right.
That reason doesn't really land though when you think of the flip side. It's like then they're really going to leave.
Do you think there's any correlation with size of company or revenue?
To if they're going to do leadership development?
Yeah.
No. I think there
Huh.
is a level of what they're able to invest and the scope of what they can do. So with my clients, I had a client that was at $10 million in revenue, and they were able to buy my on-demand program, right? It's like a per head. And that worked for them. They're going to do $35 million this year, and next year projected to do 50. And that's been in a couple, they were stuck. They were
Hmm.
stuck at 10 million for years. You scale your leadership. That's how you scale an organization. You scale leaders. Another organization I work with is just short of $1 billion in revenue. I customized a program for them, and it was way more intensive with coaching and that sort of thing. They were able, because they're bigger, to do something. They're both effective.
Hmm.
So what the smaller company had to do, and this is what I help organizations, I actually coach the leaders inside the organization because they know this stuff. Like they just don't have the bandwidth to do it all. They just need a lift. But no, there's a difference. It's not about size. It's about the visionary or not visionary leaders at that company, and if they how value driven they are, and if they actually care about their people. Some companies are more focused on their customers than their people. That's a big difference in what they're going to
Yeah.
invest in.
Yeah. And again, I think that's another example of it's not either or. You have to focus on your people because they're not going to service your customers the way you want if your people aren't trained the right way.
Yep.
All right. I have one last question for
Okay.
you. So, people are listening to this. Maybe they're fortunate enough to work in an organization that is considering training, and therefore they'll call you, and I'll make sure all your information is in the show notes. However, when we're in times of economic and uncertainty or downturns, and whether it's real or perceived, right? So we know that unemployment is incredibly low. We know that wages are incredibly high. But if you're listening to this when this actually is dropping, we are approaching a major US election. So there's some uncertainty in the market. If your company is not going to pay, what do you recommend someone do to help train themselves or get professional development themselves? That's part one. I'm going to come back with a second question.
Yeah. Uh, the easiest thing to do is to just read, to listen to podcasts like this, like Leaders or Readers. It doesn't need to take a lot of money. Behind my desk, I have all these books, but I use my local library. So if I am not sure if a book's going to be used, if I actually need it, for a client project, or, if I like it, I'll buy it then to reference it later. But there's a lot of free things. There is no shortage of information. It's just figuring out what's important and cutting through the clutter and what matters for them. So I would say take an assessment of your strengths, get very clear on what you want, and then search what you need from there. There are, I mean, there's like master classes. I've got a plethora of like old webinars and, YouTube interviews with sales leaders. It's possible to do it. And we have an option too for sales leaders that we have a program people can just get on with no coaching, but it doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be complicated. You just need to be committed and curious.
Okay. Committed and curious. So last then question connected to that is, in addition to your book, you mentioned Daniel Pink as somebody that you follow. What would you say to someone who asked you what they should be reading right now to help support them in this process of being a salesperson or a sales leader? It could be either one.
So it differs based on the level of leadership and experience that someone is in, but I love the classics. Now we were just talking about do things differently. But every time I reread The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I read something different because I'm in a different spot in my human development. And he talks about, that's what that book is about. And I didn't even get that, right? It was just, I'm like, I didn't understand that when I read that when I was 18, when I was 25, when I was 30, I read it differently. And I just think there's so much genius in there. The quintessential sales book is, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. It's just a great, it's a great book. And I got that years and years ago. I think Everyone Deserves a Great Manager is a phenomenal book. I mean, my books are good.
Well, obviously, I'm saying just if someone is trying to develop themselves and they're not getting support from their company.
Okay, so reading those books and finding people who are supportive. You can read a ton of books, but if you aren't around people who you can actually apply what you're learning in those books and talk it through and grow with, I think the book's going to fall flat. You're going to say, this is really great.
Really good point.
But find someone who, and it might be weird. You might just say, I want to join this book club, or you find a few people you respect and be like, do you want to just get together? And it's like read the book and find people to do it with. Leadership is not an individual sport. It should not be learned alone.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think just in closing, when you also think about if you are in an environment which is a fully remote environment and you're in a sales or a leadership role, you need to be thinking through, where are you going to get your community from? Whether it's something in your local environment, whether you're joining something, an online partnership or an online community where it's not going to be face-to-face, but you're not just listening to something, that you're engaging and being part of something. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it's important. I would say when you're choosing a community, give it a couple of times. There has been some events that I've attended, I've just like rolled my eyes, right? I'm like, well, that was a waste of time. And then I go back again. I'm like, oh no, this one was great.
Totally great.
So give it time. I tend to prefer smaller groups. I get very overwhelmed in big groups. And so when these communities that I choose to join, they're going to be a max of maybe 30 people in the room. And I have found that works for me. So again, go back to your strengths, get out of your comfort zone a little bit as well. And, but there's so many, resources. It's mind boggling how much is out there. Yep.
Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. Our listeners, I'm going to put all of her information in the show notes. You can bring Rebecca and her team into your organization. You can buy her book, which is fabulous. I will tell you, From Leaderboard to Leadership, Even if you're not in a pure play sales role, there are so many gems in this book as you're being promoted into higher and higher leadership levels. And we're not just talking about entry level, we're talking about every level. There is something to learn in this book. If you have questions, email me at hello@jillgriffincoaching.com. We will get them to Rebecca. As I know, we will bring her back and we will have her answer those questions. Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate you so much for being here.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm Jill Griffin, your host of the Career Refresh podcast. My mission is to make workplaces more successful for everyone. So if you have ideas for topics or future guests, please email us at hello@jillgriffincoaching.com. Until next time, embrace possibility, be generous, intentional, and kind.